Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webcast, Data into Action, Increasing Engagement and Improving Performance, sponsored by HappyOrNot. Before we begin, I would like to remind you that this webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI credit and can also be used for SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. After the webcast, you will receive an email from HR.com within 1 to 2 business days. It will include the certification credit information. You can also log into HR.com and go to your View My Credits page, where you can see the credits that you have received. If you have any questions today for our presenters or for HR.com, please type them into the Questions tab on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we will follow up with you. And now I will turn it over to Mark Vickers to get things started.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Vickers. I'm the research coordinator at HR.com, and today we're doing the Data into Action, Increasing Engagement and Improving Performance. So we're actually co-presenting today. Johanna is the director of the HR business line in North America for HappyOrNot, and I am the guy who does the research for HR.com. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to you, Johanna.
Hi, Mark. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the webcast. We're super excited to share some findings that we found being with HappyOrNot. HappyOrNot is an employee satisfaction and engagement tool, and we help customers by gathering and reporting on employee sentiments in real time. We consider ourselves a level 1 communication tool for organizations and their employees. We've recorded over 500 million feedbacks to date. We have the service in use in across 4,000 customers in 120 countries globally. And we're excited to share some of the insight on employee engagement and employee sentiment. Now we're going to discuss the overview of what to expect for today. You can go to the next slide. So today, we're going to discuss how happy, fulfilled, or challenged and dedicated are your employees. Why does it matter to know this, and how to find out when it counts the most. We'll also learn about the positive effects of employee engagement. HR.com and Mark are going to share key findings from HR.com's new State of Engagement survey in 2018. We'll also share some key data facts that we found within our client base at HappyOrNot and share the data study, and share some ideas on how to improve and engage your employees. At the end, we will be opening up the webcast for questions, so go ahead and type them in the chat and we will address them at the end of the webcast. So first of all, I always like to open it up from a perspective of what is the employee experience. Next slide. So the employee experience is composed of 2 things, the company culture and the employee engagement. Company culture, we think, is the way things are within a company, while employee engagement is the way the employees feel about the way things are at the company. Both are just as important and both make up the overall employee experience. They're critical to positive employee engagement. Employee engagement impacts individual performance. Culture predicts company performance. Ultimately, everyone owns the employee experience, both employees and their management teams, human resources, and the executive leadership. We must all take a holistic approach when looking at overall employee engagement and the employee experience. Keeping employees engaged should be an ongoing practice across the organization. Next. So
do you want me to pick up from here, Johanna?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so we're just going to quickly go over a few of the findings of our new State of Engagement survey. We went over the full findings a little earlier in the morning. We're just going to pick on a few selected slides here, and it's going to connect with the slides that come afterwards. So the first thing we want to talk about is that we asked folks whether they measure employee engagement. Out of this group, there are about 727 respondents. You can see about half of them measure employee engagement. Probably that's not enough if you're serious about engagement, but that's where we are. Now, leaders of smaller organizations, they may be more likely to feel they're in touch with their employees and so don't need to survey or other measurements to tell them what they think they already know. Others may feel like engagement is low and don't really want to call attention to it. So whereas 58% of what we looked at were highly engaged organizations measure engagement, so they're more likely to measure engagement. The same was true for only 51% of less engaged organizations. So measurement isn't everything, but it seems to favor higher engagement. So another possibility for not measuring is that some organizations just don't have the reporting and analytics capabilities. HR capabilities are still pretty much lagging in analytics competencies, not just according to the most recent engagement research, but according to other research that we've recently conducted for other organizations. So a lot of organizations may just not know exactly how or the process or what to measure. We should note that larger organizations are considerably more likely to measure engagement. They were like 71% of those organizations with 1,000 or more measure engagement, and smaller organizations are less likely to measure engagement. So the second point I wanted to make is that there's lack of measurement occurs despite the fact that 91% of HR professionals say there's solid evidence that engagement is linked to performance. So it's clear that achieving high levels of engagement is difficult for many organizations, and they're not measuring because they don't believe that it's important. In fact, the study indicates that there's a lot of agreement that there's a strong link with performance. So over 20 years, a variety of studies have indicated there's a correlation between employee engagement and performance. And for many, the real question is whether the engagement actually drives performance or is just associated with it. That is, maybe they're both driven by similar features of the organization. So there's been a lot of academic discussion about those things over the years. But overall, most people in this survey seem convinced that any linkages are genuine and that engagement does help improve overall performance. Study participants viewed engagement as having a positive effect on a number of performance indicators. Productivity and customer service were the areas where there was the greatest perceived impact, though 2/3 also stated engagement has an impact on financial performance to a high or very high degree. So the third point I wanted to make is that organizations still tend to use more conventional and less frequent ways of measuring engagement. Now, employee surveys have been around, really since the 1930s, and they have a long history of use and I will say misuse in some cases. An annual survey can be really useful and organization changing tool if it's used correctly, but often they try to capture too much data all at once. So in reality, it could take months to analyze and formulate a response to the findings. By that time, the silence in an organization may already have left employees wondering if anybody really cares about what the findings were. So organizations are experimenting with new ways to acquire more frequent and better focused employee feedback. The use of more frequent surveys is receiving a lot of attention lately, but every organization has to find the right balance. They don't want to cause survey fatigue, so they need to try and perfect this. And this is sort of a major area of innovation in the industry right now. So what we're going to do now is give a quick poll, and we're going to ask, how often do you poll your own employees? And you have multiple choices here. And at the end of this, we're going to show you what our own polling said in terms of how often people use these things. So basically, I'm sorry, Kathy, is there going to be a poll coming up here? Kathy?
It's on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I can actually give you the results, Mark. So based on the question, how often do you survey poll employees? The results came in 80% stated only once a year, 14% do it quarterly, and about 6% of the respondents do it once a month.
Okay. Well, that's great. Were there any surprises there, Johanna, for you?
I am. I'm a little surprised in the sense that it was so many just once a year. And in talking to many organizations, I've noticed that more companies are embracing a more either biannual also, but definitely not surprised that it's not happening less than a quarter or once or even once a day. So
Yeah,
it's pretty standard. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we found, that a lot of companies, in fact, more than half of organizations that responded to our survey that actually measured to begin with, only do it once a year or once every 2 or 3 years. So not that often. We also found that only 9% do it continuously, and 12% do it every 6 months. Now, what I should note here is what we don't have the slide showing that highly engaged organizations do this continuously at a greater level. So when we break the cohorts out into 2 groups, we find that only 5% of the less engaged organizations measure engagement continuously. But we found that 16% of the organizations that are more highly engaged do it continuously. We also found that the more highly engaged organizations are more likely to survey every 6 months, and they're a little less likely than average to survey once a year. So the more highly engaged organizations seem to be a little more committed to continuously, and the less highly engaged organizations are much more likely to do things only once a year. So the next point I wanted to make is a lot of organizations really don't strongly leverage the data, even when it's collected. So there's whereas 73% of organizations takes actions to a high or very high degree once the data is in. The same is true for only 37% of less engaged organizations. So why is that? Maybe there's a severe disconnect between HR and business leaders and less engaged organizations. If HR conducts an engagement survey and leaders don't want to act on it, then the engagement may actually be worse off than if the survey never happened. So most of the responsibility for action on engagement rests on senior leaders and immediate supervisors. Without communication and follow-up, the result is going to end up being low trust and frustrated supervisors and disengaged employees. And as we've seen, probably lower organizational performance as well. So we're going to do another poll. We're going to talk about how long does it take to compile survey results. And you have several different options, and we'll be interested in the results. So Johanna, I think maybe you'll be able to see this better. Just let me know when you can see the results.
Will do. We're about 39% have voted so far.
Yeah, so we found that there's a lot of diversity in these kind of results, and some do it very quickly, some not so much. Just like how often you do a survey in a year, there's a lot of diversity there as well.
Yes. Okay, so we closed the poll. So when we asked how long does it take to compile key survey results, a few days, 14% responded a few days, 14% responded about a week, 46% responded that it takes about a month, and 25% responded several months. And yes.
Yeah, so that doesn't surprise me. Does it surprise you, any of that data?
No, it doesn't, and it doesn't at all. And what's unfortunate about the 46% over a month or 25% is these engagement surveys are so strategic, and you have such great information to gather from them, and the fact that it takes over a month to be able to gather the data, I'd wonder how long it takes to then be able to share it. So it doesn't surprise me. These are the trends.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me either. And it does take, I mean, I've worked on climate surveys, and there's so much data to be gathered, and some of the data isn't even quantitative. Some of it's qualitative, and it just takes time to pull it together. So I completely get that, and I think those surveys are often good, but maybe they don't work as a standalone type of measurement tool as well. So going to this next stage of the research, given the trends we've looked at, it's little wonder that organizations have seen engagement levels sort of stagnate or even decline. Our survey also explored respondents' opinions on the current state of employee engagement in their organization and the feelings about engagement in the organizations. So based on this, engagement is most widely viewed as occurring when an employee gives his or her best work, and this can also be called discretionary effort. So in this study, we asked participants about the degree to which employees put forward efforts, and only 9% strongly agreed that their employees do that, with 35% agreeing. So this indicates that most employers still face really major employee engagement problems. So when we ask folks about their own engagement and how it's gone up and down, and keep in mind this isn't all the organizations, this is only the ones that we're measuring, we found that a considerable number of organizations say that it's actually decreased. It's gone down by more than 5% or down between 1 and 5%, or stayed about the same. But there are a considerable number, a fraction, but still a sizable fraction, that have actually seen some progress in recent years. They've gone up between 1 and 5% or even more than 5%. Well, that's a small number, 13%, but still, there are the occasional companies that are having some real success here. So that's both good news and bad news. So given these findings, there are methods to improve the way organizations measure and manage employee engagement. Well, one method is to make engagement a core business strategy, not just an HR initiative. Senior leaders should probably take greater ownership of employee engagement, because leadership and culture are really correlated with higher engagement rates, according to our research. They should really come to agreement on what employee engagement means. Organizations best influence engagement when they clearly define what they're trying to influence and whether or not their actions are having an impact. Another strategy is to acquire the right tools and methods for measuring and reporting on employee engagement. Now, you have to be cautious here because nobody wants to chase a bunch of fads, but it makes sense to invest in proven analytic technologies and to work with experts on this. The best source for finding these resources are often going to be colleagues who've successfully made the transition to a highly engaged corporate cultures. So considering measuring engagement on a continuous basis, if this can be done in ways that are not onerous or intrusive. Another point I want to make is to make sure that leadership development programs emphasize behaviors that engage employees. Among the key behaviors to focus on here are listening to employee feedback, maintaining a positive culture, fostering collaboration, and communicating clear expectations to employees. These are all really, really strong strategies according to this research, which I'm not going to really get into anymore in this presentation. The other thing to do is communicate and collaborate with leaders. Help them discover the best practices by maintaining an ongoing flow of practices. For example, a series of articles, videos, white papers on engagement strategy. This stream of information and communication can really have a positive impact on the quality of leadership over time. You can also help leaders act on good information. If you find that HR is gathering and reporting on employee engagement data, but leaders are not acting on the recommendations, you're not alone. Use that information from the research and speak with managers about the negative impact of the gap between rhetoric and action. You will know that you're having an impact when you sense that those who are not open and transparent become less comfortable with their behaviors. So those are some of the strategies that we think are important based on the research. And with that, I'm going to turn this back over to you, Johanna.
Yes, and great, Mark. I actually wanted to mention a couple things, if I may. I mean, we're doing great on time. When we talked about the first poll and asked how frequently the companies were surveying their employees, and we mentioned 80% were doing the longer term, something came to mind where we really want to think about something that it includes all the frequencies. You want to definitely have your long-term, more strategic annual surveys that are based on core competencies, company development, organizational development, and then have those more frequently ones, maybe, quarterly or weekly or even daily per se. And it really is a holistic approach to look at. You could never ask your employees how they're doing too much. It's never going to get old to check in on the employee. So I wanted to make sure and bring that point. You were doing such a great job. I didn't want to interrupt while you were going over some of the information. And there was 2 slides that I think when you clicked, it went a little quickly, that I did want to mention real quick.
Okay, so you want to go backward?
Can you go to slide 6? I just wanted to share something real quickly there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. One more, right there, perfect. So the reason I wanted to highlight this is a study that the Temkin Group provided for us as far as what are engaged employees. And they are an organization's most valuable asset. Striving for high employee engagement is an approach resulting in the right conditions for all members of the organization. Employees want to give of their best each day. It shows that they're committed to the company goals and values, and they show higher motivation to contribute to the overall success of the company. So ultimately, high employee engagement will provide a high return on investment from the companies in these employees. This creates an enhanced sense of well-being also for their employees, which affects their overall livelihood on how they feel about their jobs. And we all know that work-life balance is extremely important. So being engaged and happily engaged at work is only going to have more positive effects on the day-to-day life of the employees. So the Temkin Group found that engaged employees are more likely to recommend their employer as a great place to work. Engaged employees work longer and harder and to do whatever needs to get the job done. Third, engaged employees are more likely to do what's good for the company and really keeping in mind the company's vision and mission, and they're willing to exceed expectations. And finally, engaged employees are more open and willing to make recommendations for improvement. So here comes again that topic you mentioned earlier about communication and keeping the lines of communication always open. A highly engaged employee is going to be more comfortable to do that and can potentially add, mission critical details that can make the job and the company better. Can go to the next slide.
Oh, sorry. Do you want to go to this slide or you want to pick up where we left off, Johanna?
Right there, and then we can go to pick up where we left off.
All right, perfect.
Last one. Perfect. So we found in working with all of the companies that there are several positive effects of employee engagement. One is increased revenue via improvements in productivity, and also even during turbulent times. Engaged employees will help reduce employee turnover and absenteeism, and they often lead to higher customer satisfaction, which again increases revenue. Engaged employees demonstrate improved quality of work, again, overall well-being, and promote work safety, which is also very important in our environment. Engaged employees will also demonstrate increased motivation and innovation, and they helping the employer become an employer of choice, which ultimately leads to attracting new talent. And right now, the war on talent is at its highest because of such a low unemployment rate in the country. So ensuring that your employees are engaged, it's only going to help being able to attract that top talent across the organization. Okay, now we can go where we left off. So at HappyOrNot, I wanted to share some information that we've gathered from insight data within the respondents in our company and the customers we work with. You can go to the next slide. So HappyOrNot's worldwide data insights and benchmarking provide our companies with information to help set targets and improve performance and surpass the industry's employee satisfaction benchmark. As employers, we're all looking to find ways to find best practices and know what other companies that may be doing things in a positive way. What could we do to do things better? Next slide, Mark. So in our insights for 2017, HappyOrNot collected 7.8 million feedbacks around employee engagement and employee satisfaction across 1,000 companies worldwide. And we're able to help customers figure out what works best across the spectrum. And I wanted to share now, in our findings, we came up with 5 questions that were most prevalent in a daily surveying tool across these organizations. And if you can go to the next slide, Mark. And this is just to open it up. What were those top 5 questions that companies are asking their employees? First, how was your workday today? The simplicity of this question is impactful for many reasons. What does it do? The measurement focuses on overall job performance. Why do employers want to ask this of their employees? This is going to give them the ability and support to do their job well, which correlates directly to employee satisfaction and performance. And based on what the poll said with these annual surveys, we're able to have a company be able to focus on those annual strategic questions and then have something more day-to-day where you're asking just overall, how was your workday? Little deviation in the sentiment of an employee on a day-to-day basis, if addressed early, can eliminate more of the drastic problems from an employee engagement perspective. So it's like, let's identify issues early on so that we can address them early on. And asking this question, it tells periods or areas of low scores can indicate imminent productivity. It can talk to motivation and also engagement losses. So again, employees being your most valuable asset, wouldn't you want to keep a pulse on what's going on a more regular basis to ensure that things are going as they should? Next slide. So now the second most popular question was, how do you feel about the level of support you're getting in order to do the job well done? Again, why would you want to ask this question? This is a direct correlation to leadership. And as you mentioned earlier, Mark, in the study, leadership and aligning with correct leadership and having core competencies around encouraging employee engagement in management style, in the day-to-day, are going to impact employee engagement. So asking this question is important. And why do you ask it? Because it's going to provide the ability and support that they need to do their job well done, which again correlates to overall engagement. And it can also tell about low scores. We all know, especially with the unemployment rate, and I'm going to go ahead and mention this again, the top reason why employees leave their organizations is due to management. So if you're able to pick out during a week or during a quarter that there's low engagement around something like this, as far as how do the employees feel supported, maybe there's actions that can be taken as far as leadership training, one-on-one conversations, and encouraging that open dialogue.
You know, Johanna, can I just jump in here and say something about the research? We found this is really, really important. In the research we just did, we found that when we divided cohorts into the highly engaged organizations and the less engaged organizations, that the less engaged organizations were a lot less likely to actually provide the resources needed for people to do their jobs. It was very interesting because it's not just a matter of engagement, is it? It's a matter of other things. It's a matter of productivity. You know, it's basically management 101 is to provide the resources people need to get their job done. So we really found a strong finding here, and I was amazed, actually. I usually know the data pretty well, but I was surprised at how few organizations, in some of the cohorts, are actually providing the support and the resources people need to get the job done.
Definitely, definitely. Quick question, Mark. Are we going to be able to provide the feedback from that great study you guys conducted for all of the attendees?
Sure, I think so. I think so.
Okay,
Catherine will be able to answer that better, but I believe so.
Okay, great. Okay, we can go now to the next slide.
All right.
Number 3, top question. And again, this goes in line with what you exactly just mentioned. Please rate how motivated you are towards your work today. Again, finding out what's going on in the life cycle of the employee on a regular basis is going to impact, motivation, productivity, training and development. A less engaged employee may not retain or capture what's being trained and taught to them, which in essence is going to then affect their productivity when they're done with the training. And how costly is it for organizations to invest in training programs, so on and so forth. So again, this lack of engagement can have negative results or adverse results across the life cycle of the employees. It's not just on the day-to-day, it's from recruitment to retirement. And you want to always be able to keep a pulse on how motivated your employees are today, because the minute there's a lack of motivation or one of the, team members is a little off, it just affects the overall team environment and the goals of the company. And again, what this tells is, if you have low levels of motivation, they're often linked to dissatisfaction with elements of the job. It could be work life, and knowing when and where these fluctuations occur are going to help identify the cause, but more importantly, help you be able to come up with the remedy. Next slide. Number 4, this one was really interesting for us, which was please rate either cafeteria, lounge, IT, and/or employee services. So often companies, we focus on our customers and how well the customers are being taken care of, where we may sometimes take for granted how employees are doing from a service perspective. And as an employer, we are the service provider to our employees, correct? So you want to make sure that whatever benefits or services you're offering your employees, one is being well received, they're appreciating it, they understand why they're getting that service, and then that if the service quality is there. There's nothing more discouraging to be at an environment where you're being told, hey, you should appreciate this because we're giving this to you, correct? And so often we mistake offering a certain service to our employees as a direct positive impact on employee engagement. And that's not always the case. You want to definitely ask, how things are going. I've worked with an organization where they love focusing on their perks and employee benefits that they provide for employees. And for them, it was crucial to know, as basic as on Tuesdays, they had these cool breakfasts for everyone. They wanted to ensure that people enjoyed the breakfast. Turned out that they weren't aligned with some of the wellness initiatives within the organization. So the employees didn't really appreciate what the company was doing for them. Once they started asking on a regular basis, what did you think of today's breakfast? And they realized, oh, we're not really giving the employees what they want. That small tweak was able to, make things better across the board. So it's important to always ask on the day-to-day how the employees feel about certain services you're offering them. And this is one of the questions that can definitely give you immediate information so that you can take immediate actionable data to fix the problem. And it'll tell you overall overperforming areas can be examples for the underperforming areas. So if there's a group that's rating higher, maybe you can use that as a benchmark to teach the other groups within the organization. Next slide. And finally, the top 5th question that we found from our study is, do you feel your work is valued by your manager? And isn't this a loaded question, but it's so impactful, because this literally will show you alignment to the overall goals of the company. And as you mentioned, Mark, leadership is important, and being engaged both from a leadership perspective, but knowing how to measure and how to identify engagement strategies is key. So why do you want to ask this? You want to know how the employees feel about if they're valued. When you're not valued somewhere, you're not going to be as productive. You are not going to be as engaged, as involved in the well-being of the organization. If you notice low scores, it can indicate maybe it's just poor communication, and having that one-on-one conversation with leadership, because for 1 week they might have had low marks in some question like this, that one conversation can then totally swing the pendulum the other way and add improvement to the company. And then again, it's a trickle-down effect So paying attention to the smaller details on a day-to-day basis can definitely help from a perspective of encouraging management to stay engaged with the employees. Because ultimately, it's a two-way street, employee to management and management to employees.
Yeah, can I mention something here, Johanna?
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
So, yeah, we found that when we asked people who is primarily responsible for engagement in your organization, we found that the immediate supervisor is the top person who is responsible for engagement within the organization. We also found it was interesting that the senior managers are responsible for engagement to a large degree, even more so than like the employee themselves or HR. So it's not just immediate supervisors, probably. It's also people up and down the chain. So I think that even senior people really need to make people feel like their work is being valued. Or, the immediate supervisor can do a lot, but they're not the sole person that people are looking to. Sometimes they're looking to people higher up in the organization as well. I just wanted to mention that because that was one of the key survey findings we had.
No, definitely. Thank you for sharing that. So this is just quick data that I wanted to share on just some of our benchmarking information. Like I mentioned, this data came from 7.8 million respondents and across 1,000 companies, and it was actually interesting to see how things panned out. So we asked, how was your work day to day, which is the most asked questions across companies. And then I can share it with you now, the next slide. And it was interesting to find that the weekly trends are pretty spot on. Friday came out being the top trending as far as satisfaction. Weekends, of course, were less, but our data shows that ranking the highest was Friday. Taking actions to boost motivation and employee happiness during or beginning of the week or the end of the week will then help with not making Friday just the happiest day of the week. I had a customer one time that was working with their team, and they noticed that they were having these staff meetings on Tuesdays. And when they started asking more daily engagement type questions, lo and behold, the Tuesdays turned out to be some of the days with the lowest satisfaction. And by just tweaking the time of the staff meetings and what they were doing, they were able to just, again, swing that pendulum the other way because they had the information. So when you have that data at your fingertips to be able to see what's going on, you can make immediate action. So no surprise here that Friday turns out to be the happiest day across the board, and Saturday being the least. But if you notice, there's just a slow increase as far as when you go from Monday to Friday. What if there were small changes that could be made on Mondays so that everyone started off the week with a bang and then ended up on a high as well? Okay, next slide. Now we wanted to share the monthly trends. So the data shows that December actually is the most satisfying month. But then I was thinking, wow, that's interesting because typically December is what, year end for many organizations. So the fact that it's year end and it's super busy, people are still happy to be at work and do what they do. So the data shows that the time of year typically associated with Q4 doesn't really affect people's happiness. People are still engaged and are still doing what they need to do. What if, as an organization, you can look at the different quarters or different time periods of the year and do specific activities or have engagement initiatives where you can increase that engagement across the year? I wonder what that would have, what impact that would have on productivity. So it's just things, again, to take a look at when you're looking at data on a more frequent basis. Okay, next slide. So from a benchmark, so this was really interesting. For 2017, across those 1,000 companies, we found 71.9% of employees have workday satisfaction. What's interesting is for 2016, we were actually a little higher than that. A couple things affected that. There were more companies that were doing the more frequent daily and or weekly surveys. But in 2016, it was at 75.6. And for 2017, it was at 71.9, which begs to ask the question, employee engagement is so top of mind with so many organizations, but what are we really doing to make a positive impact on that? So we were excited to see that it was 71%, but there's definitely room for improvement on a day-to-day satisfaction from a perspective of the employees. Next slide. And pretty much, and I want to start tying things in because we want to have room for questions. So from an employee perspective, employee engagement perspective, if you want to measure employee satisfaction, follow the performance, meaning look at the key data, figure out what's going on. But to improve, the most important is to take action. And one of those actions is sharing the information, share the data that you find, let employees know what's going on, open that dialogue. As you mentioned, Mark, it's not just about the direct supervisor and management. Senior leadership can have a huge impact on employee engagement. In ways of improvement is if you have senior leadership on board with the initiative, have them promote that throughout the organization. And again, just gonna encourage that holistic approach to employee engagement and what the company's looking to do overall.
Johanna, can I just interrupt a second and ask you a question?
Yes, go ahead.
One of the findings we had was that senior leaders often just don't prioritize engagement. I was surprised to find that was one of the key drivers of disengagement within the organizations. There's a huge difference between the highly engaged and less engaged organizations in terms of just leadership prioritization. So I just wanted to ask you, why do you think so many leaders are just not prioritizing this issue?
And I wonder if it's not just so much that they're not prioritizing, it's just that they may not even be aware of how important it is on a regular basis. Because it's so, the onus is put on human resources per se. So HR owns, engagement surveys, HR owns the end of year surveys. I think it's more of a disconnect in keeping engagement aligned with the company goals and cultures. And because typically engagement is more of an abstract because it's the feels of how employees are doing, it might be perceived that it doesn't have an effect on the bottom line or the dollars. And I think that's where the disconnect. So it might be just the awareness of it, not realizing how important it is to drive business, drive revenue, but also ensure that your employees are happy. And I think it's just that disconnect more so than anything else.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, okay. So we can go now to the next slide. So measuring employee engagement. Measuring employee engagement. Oh, one more. You went too fast.
Oh, sorry. Do I need to back up?
One, yes, back up one.
All right.
There we go. So yeah, measuring employee engagement either daily or frequently across all areas of the workplace provides valuable insights into the operational performance. And it's going to help identify areas within the company which require improvement. Like you mentioned, the day-to-day tasks, the employees being engaged and actively motivated, leadership being able to motivate and encourage the team. It's also going to help human resources focus on strategic initiatives. HR professionals, they get into the business of HR because they want to take care of the employees. And I'm sure if you ask most of them what would they like to do on a day-to-day basis, they probably don't want to spend their time just putting out fires. They probably want to also focus on how can we make this environment help and better. So that's why I think measuring it across all areas is important, because engagement leads to satisfaction, which is going to help the atmosphere and overall motivation of the company. It's going to help everyone with time management because people are focused on what they're supposed to do, and then just generate an overall well-being across the employee space for both employees and management. Next slide. So wanted to share some ways on how companies can increase employee engagement and just focus on some key tasks throughout their initiatives. First, you want to define engagement as it relates to your culture. Sit down and figure out really what's important to us and what's going to drive that. Measure employee engagement and gather the data. Select the right leadership. That's key, and we've talked about it in some of the findings you just mentioned. Also, train and development against those core competencies that are part of your company culture so that you can increase that engagement. It's aligning, you know, the A's and the B's, making sure that everyone is working towards the same goal. And definitely always connect with employees and management and supervisors and share information that you find. So if you're taking the time to figure out what employees think, make sure you're sharing it back and empowering them with the knowledge to know how everything is going and how their counterparts feel within the organization. And then overall, as a company, you want to always encourage multi-level engagement approach, meaning focus on the employee, management, human resources, and ultimately up the chain to executives. In closing, Mark, you know, striving for high employee engagement is an approach that's going to result in right conditions for all members of the organization. Employees are going to want to give their best each day. They're going to be committed to the company goals and values. They're going to stay motivated and want to contribute to the overall success. And this creates that enhanced sense of well-being for the employees and ultimately everyone at the organization.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you, Johanna.
Yeah, thank you. We have 14 minutes for questions. Let's see if anyone has any questions.
So we do have some questions. The first question is, we're a small state agency with limited resources and funding. Is there an effective and inexpensive way to apply analytics to engagement, or would that be an oxymoron?
Do you want to take it, or am I taking this one? What do you think, Mark?
Either way, it's fine. Why don't you take first shot at it, and I'll just jump in.
I can definitely appreciate being a small agency, and at first you want to come across, what are your goals? If you are going to start doing engagement surveys or asking information of your employees, first figure out what is it that you really want to find out and what's important to you. And then if you stay specific, it should not be a costly initiative, because it's just a matter of honing in, what do I want to find out? Then you figure out, how do I ask this and how do I find this data? And then more importantly, how you can share it. So it does not have to be this huge initiative where you're buying this HRIS system with all the bells and whistles. It really comes down to the team. Sit down with a team, figure out what's important, and then come up with a game plan from there.
Right. That sounds great. And I would add that there's so many different ways to measure engagement and analyze the data. And you can start with just some really basics. You don't have to invest a lot of money at first. Start with a couple of measurements and then kind of work your way up as you progress along these lines. Some companies don't even do a survey. Some companies look at things like exit interview data, or they look at turnover rates, and they try to determine engagement based on these. I don't think those are the greatest ways to determine engagement, but just by virtue of looking at that kind of data, you can start to get a feel for engagement in the organization. One of the top ways organizations are trying to do some analytics is actually through one-on-ones. So people sitting down with their employees and just sort of crafting their opinions on the engagement. So it's not as structured as some of the other ways, but it is a fairly common way to do some, I don't know if it's metrics, but they're definitely trying to figure out, where engagement is within the organization. So I think there's lots of ways to do it, and I do think that we're still just at the beginning of this trend. We're not anywhere close to the end of it. I think we're finding lots of alternatives to that annual climate survey.
Exactly, and definitely you want to, since the cost is, they want to keep costs down, maybe focus on celebrating the wins. How often does that not help everyone feel good about what they're doing? So during those one-on-ones, if they're finding out great information that the employees think, hey, ABC company, you're doing this the right way, focus on what that looks like and maybe applying that to other areas that may not be at the same level. And it's not going to be an additional cost, because they're just looking at the information that they already know and what's working for them.
Right. So another question. The question was, for those less engaged companies that are surveyed continuously, are they doing this recently to improve employee engagement?
Are they asking regarding the survey findings?
Yeah, actually, I'm not sure. I was wondering if that was one of your findings or one of my findings. But so let me think about this in terms of the continuous nature of this. Are they doing this recently to improve employee engagement? I'm not sure what's meant there, but I think that one of the reasons companies are doing it continuously is because they feel like things are just changing on the ground so quickly. It's, what happened 3 months ago may not be what's happening today. So many things affect engagement. And the other part of it is engagement shifts so much from department to department, business unit to business unit, function to function. And it's really hard to say, our company is not engaged or 30% of our company is engaged. That type of thing it's usually an overstatement. And what you really want to do is be able to drill down, find out how many people or what percentage of people in this division today feel engaged as opposed to this division, next week or next month. What's your take on it?
No. I agree. It's a matter of looking at the different areas and comparing that. So I think you said it perfectly. I want to make sure we get some more questions in, and we only have 9 minutes.
Okay, sure. So the end of the year, this is a question about your data. Okay. The end of the year has a lot of holidays. Is it possible that work-life balance is better that time of year because of the days off? Is that one of the reasons you may see an uptick there?
We thought that could be, but actually because the data was collected on a daily basis, the actual response rate and the number of respondents didn't really change. So while it is a higher time for people to take time off, people aren't taking time off all at the same time together. So we didn't think it was going to be that big of a distraction or a deviance to the data, because it looked like it was the same number of respondents month in, month out. Yeah. So possibly it may have to do that they're happier because it is the holidays, but again, people were still going to work, and they were rating it as a high satisfaction date.
Great. So another question was, I do not understand daily engagement surveys. I think it's more important for supervisors to connect with employees and have personal conversations on how their workday was. It's kind of more of a comment than a question, but I figured you may want to chime in on that one.
Can you say that one more time?
So the statement was, I do not understand daily engagement surveys. I think it's more important for supervisors to connect with employees and have personal conversations on how their workday was.
And I agree, definitely it's important to have that one-on-one conversations, but what the daily or the more pulse-in surveys can offer is just that kind of bird's eye view of what's going on across the organization. So it's not one or the other. Again, you want to do both. You want to have a more kind of engaged daily check-in on the employees, see how things are going. Employees will tend to be a little bit more forthcoming with a lot of information when you give it to them little by little, whereas in a one-on-one, they may not be as comfortable to open up. But if they see that they're in an organization that values their opinion on a daily basis, it's going to kind of foster that relationship of open communication, and they're going to feel that, hey, my management wants to now talk to me. Maybe they want to find out why the response rates are ABC. So now it gives them that pivot to have that one-on-one conversation. So it's almost like one thing facilitates the next.
Right. So we have another question. What differences, if any, have you observed in the customer satisfaction of companies with high engagement versus with low engagement? And why don't I take that one first?
Yeah, go ahead. That could be a whole nother webinar.
Yeah. So we asked respondents about the impact of engagement, and we gave them a variety of things to select from. At the very top of the list is they thought engagement has an impact on customer satisfaction. And in fact, the organizations that are more highly engaged felt like they had an upper hand in terms of customer satisfaction, but they also felt like they had an advantage in other areas. For example, we asked the cohorts about how they fared in terms of financial performance. Are they, what quartile are they in compared to their competitors in terms of financials? And we found that the highly engaged organizations were much more likely to be in the top quartile than the less engaged organizations. So that we didn't ask them specifically about, whether financial performance was tied to engagement. Rather, we did the correlation after the fact. So it really lends credence to the idea that engagement is tied to these things, that it's also tied to customer satisfaction. Now, I know that there are models, you may be familiar with it, Johanna, that just look at the chain of events between customers and employees and the bottom line. And sometimes those can get a little complicated, but there is a real logic to watching customer satisfaction increase as engagement increases within the organization. So what's your take on that?
No, definitely. And again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. So many companies will focus primarily, the customer is always right and the customer is most important. And we found with some of the companies we've worked with that those that treat their employee satisfaction with the same level of care as they do with customer satisfaction, both go hand in hand. The higher satisfaction rates on the employee side yielded the same higher customer satisfaction rates, and it was a direct correlation across some of the data that we've worked with companies that measure satisfaction across employees and customers. Hello? Mark, did I lose you?
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. I think you were on mute.
Okay. Oh, sorry about that.
Sorry about that, yeah.
So the question was about listening skills within organizations. And the question was, why do you think companies are not providing better listening skills within organizations? Why are leaders bad at this? Do we have an explanation for it? Is it just lack of prioritization? Is it lack of development? What's your sense on that?
I think it's a little bit of definitely lack of development around that skill. I mean, listening and active listening is an active skill that we can use in all facets of our life, and especially in business. We listen to respond. We don't listen to actually hear what is being said. And the same thing goes when we're asking employees. Are we asking them about information that we want to know about, or are we going to be challenging and really be vulnerable and ask the tough questions? So I think the tough part of listening is we're so quick to just want to hear so that then we have a solution, whereas sometimes just really take in everything and then come up with the solution. Don't immediately have the solution and just ask just to ask. Make sense?
Yeah. No, is there a development strategy for attaining better listening? Is that coaching, or is there anything you'd recommend in terms of getting people to listen better?
I mean, getting people to listen better, one is just asking the right question that, again, is aligned with what you want to find out. For example, there's no point in checking on employees, work-life balance if you have an environment that's very, very sales-driven, let's say, or high demand and high peak season. That may not be the optimal question to ask someone. Maybe you want to ask something like, do you feel that your work is valuable, and is all this work worth it? So ask the right question regarding on what you want to find out. Don't just ask to ask. So from a leadership perspective, I think so often as an employer, I know we've fallen guilty to this, is a top performer in a certain area immediately gets promoted to become the leader of that group. But really, are they a great manager? Do they have the listening skills? So I think a lot more can be done around development specific to engagement in relation to listening. Because if you're really listening, then the employees are going to continue to offer the information. If someone feels that they're not being heard, guess what? We're going to send them these surveys. We can ask them the same question every day, but nothing's going to happen because they don't feel heard. So it really comes to the intent first.
Yeah, I think that we're probably at the top of the hour now. So Kathy,
We are.
would you like to close it out for us? Anyway, thanks everybody.
Thank you very much to Mark Vickers and Johanna Felipe for educating our audience today. And just a few reminders to our attendees. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archive recording and slides will be available for up to 7 days for our free members. And for our certification members, you have unlimited access. All webcast credits are stored in your HR.com account. Watch for your HR.com email to arrive within 1 to 2 business days, and that will contain your certification credit information. Your feedback is important to us, so please take a moment to fill out the final exit survey that will appear on your screen once the webcast is ended. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.